Hello, welcome to Roy's Book Reviews. I'm Roy. If you have seen any of the videos that I have posted so far, you'll know that up until now I have reviewed one book per video. I'm going to break that trend here and review a handful of books together. The reason why they're collected is because they're all by the same author, who happens to be one of my favorite authors of all time, the one and only John Irving. I'm going to start with one of my favorites of his, which is A Prayer for Owen Meany. I said that John Irving is one of my favorite writers. That does not mean that I have loved each of his novels equally. As I'm sure is the case with many of you, when you have a favorite writer who's written many novels and you try to read through their entire catalog, there are going to be some that stand out as your favorites. There also may be some that you find are not quite up to par with the best of the best. And that has been the case with Mr. Irving. I am particularly fond of A Prayer for Owen Meany and Cider House Rules and The Hotel New Hampshire. And I am especially in love with The World According to Garp, which I consider to be one of the top 5, top 10 novels ever written by anyone. So I'm going to start off with A Prayer for Owen Meany. I was fortunate enough to actually attend an author reading when John Irving was doing publicity for Owen Meany. This was at my alma mater, NYU, when I was still a student there. I can say from my brief conversation with him afterwards, as well as a later correspondence that I had with him a few years later, that John Irving is not only an amazing writer, but he's also just a really cool guy, gracious guy, class act who really appreciates his fans. As long as he keeps writing books, I plan to keep reading them. And as with many books that are amongst the favorite of anybody's, um, there is a scene in this book that has stuck with me for years after, and I think it's just something I'll always remember. And there are certain books that you read and then you completely forget just about everything about it, even if it's a book that you really enjoyed. You're like, oh, that was a great book. I can barely remember it. At least I know that's the case with me. I don't have the greatest memory, which is why I'm glad. Um, I've written down a lot of reviews of books I've read, so when I look back at them, I'm like, oh, okay, that's what that was about. Because if I just had to go from my memory, I'd be in trouble. But certain books, even if you don't remember every little detail, there'll be a certain scene, a certain line, a certain mannerism of a character, whatever it may be, that sticks with you forever. In A Prayer for Owen Meany, the narrator, who happens to be a teacher in Canada, he talks about teaching English literature to high school students. They're reading books like Camus' The Stranger and Kafka's Metamorphosis. Those are books that I also read when I was in high school. And the narrator says that just because a bunch of existentialists happen to have been far superior writers to the guys who wrote the Bible, that's no reason to doubt the existence of God. And for whatever reason, that line is always stuck with me. More than just about anything else that happens in the book, even though overall the book is fantastic. I wouldn't quite call Owen Meany a religious book. I'll just say it's a wonderfully engaging one by a brilliant author at the top of his form. And it certainly does have religious elements, but it's in no means preachy. So that is my review of A Prayer for Owen Meany, It was very interesting to see it being read by the author. He read, I believe he read the first paragraph of each chapter. And when he read portions that were in the voice of Owen Meany, he did it in this kind of high-pitched voice that he felt that Owen Meany had and that he intended him to have. Not quite the same voice as the actor who plays him in the movie. It was just an interesting way to watch a book reading. I highly recommend you read this book along with some of the others by John Irving that I mentioned, including the next one I'm going to talk about, which is The World According to Garp. About that one, I wrote that I'd say Lolita and Love in the Time of Cholera are the two best written books that I've ever read. But if I had to pick my all-time favorite book, I'd probably go with The World According to Garp. There are a couple of other books that I've since added to my best books ever written list since I wrote this review. But not much has changed about the fact that The World According to Garp is one of my all-time favorites. John Irving takes us on the path of T.S. Garp's life from conception to death, and I was enthralled every step of the way. This book is full of humanity, full of both light and dark humor, and full of insight into the human condition. Irving took over from Charles Dickens and put his own unique spin on telling a tale and creating characters that stay with you. I'll also add that while the movie based on it is less than a masterpiece, not that it wasn't a valiant effort to condense a lengthy, complex story. Robin Williams gave us an admirable performance that showed he had a lot more range and substance as an actor than most people probably realized at the time. This is well before he did some other movies and that were dramas and showed how talented he was. May he rest in peace. John Lithgow is also nothing short of glorious in the movie adaptation. But back to the book, I'm just going to conclude by stating that if you are a fan of masterful storytelling and larger than life, but still quite realistic characters, you should definitely pick up this book. I'm jealous of everyone who gets to accomplish what I can do no longer, which is to read this wonderful book for the very first time. That's what I had to say about The World According to Garp, which it's just a masterful book. The next book I will write about is Last Night in Twisted River. This is one of John Irving's more recent novels. About this one, I wrote that John Irving at his worst is more fascinating to read than many writers at their best. I would say that Last Night in Twisted River, he's somewhere in the middle. This is not one of my favorites. It's not one of my least favorites by him. An interesting thing about Last Night in Twisted River is that it is in many ways a meditation on John Irving's writing career. It's as if he decided to give a gift to faithful readers who have followed him book after book by tossing in as many familiar elements as possible. The more John Irving novels you've read in the past, the more you happen to know about his personal life, which works itself into his books. And the more elements and themes you'll instantly recognize. Some examples are beers. I always pronounce that word wrong. I'm talking about the animal, not the beverage. Farting dogs, some little things. Wrestling, loss of a child, car accident caused while sexual activity is taking place in one of the vehicles, abortion, New Hampshire, Canada, and the main character being a writer. The character masters his craft at the Iowa Writers' Workshop. That's something that, those are things that you will find in quite a few John Irving books as you go through his catalog. Um, One of his books is adapted into a film and wins an Oscar, um, which is something that happened to John Irving. Um, Irving seems to be winking at his beloved longtime readers throughout this book, giving them liberal dashes of the old while presenting them with the new. Technically, the plot is about a man and his son spending the majority of their lives on the run because of an accidental killing and their attempt to cover it up. But what this book is really about is the process of becoming a writer, which is something that John Irving loves to write about. A process that never stops, no matter how many books one has already written. Each book is a new beginning, a new opportunity to learn how to get from beginning to end, even if this means going from end to beginning. It isn't for everyone, the way I feel some of his biggest successes happen to be. But for John Irving fans, it's a must. So that's my review of Last Night in Twisted River. And the next book of his, the last one that I will talk about here, is also a recent one. I believe it might be his most recent one, Avenue of Mysteries. I was not a fan of this book. My favorite thing about it, to be honest, is the title. I really like the title. But after that, I was like, I don't know, what are you doing here, John? I kept waiting for it to get better and less odd as it went along. Not that odd is bad, and John Irving is the master of making readers fall in love with peculiar characters. Even kids who seem overly obsessed with statues of legendary religious virgins, such as Mary, rather than having normal kid interest. But as I read this novel, I got the feeling that John Irving simply felt like writing about writing again, and aging and dying, and religion/Catholicism, and homophobia and sex. All things he's written profoundly about before, but in more intriguing and plot-driven ways in the past. He delves into miracles and ghosts/angels to a greater extent in Avenue of Mysteries than most of his earlier works, though miracles are also nothing new to the prose of John Irving. The fact of the matter is there are many familiar elements recognizable to readers of his earlier work in this book, and the author's easy-to-read and digest style is as John Irving-esque as ever, more or less. But at his best, John Irving writes novels that I fall madly in love with, and that simply wasn't the case with this one. Something was missing, or perhaps too much of something usually restrained was present. John Irving is still and always will be one of my literary heroes and favorite authors. But if you've never read a John Irving novel, I do not advise starting with this one. I do advise starting with one of the ones I mentioned earlier, such as The World According to Garp, or Prayer for Owen Meany, Outside House Rules, Hotel New Hampshire. Then eventually work your way to some of his more recent reads and recent books, and so that you can examine some of the topics that he likes to go over with a fine tooth comb over and over, and he gets more and more in depth in dealing with these facets of his life as his writing career goes along. Thank you for your time. This is my longest video to date because I had to speak about several books here. I hope I kept your interest. I hope I convinced you to give John Irving a shot if you have not already. I hope you have a great day. Goodbye.